Everyone. Happy Thursday. Welcome to the Newly podcast, where you get practical, no BS insights on how to grow yourself and grow your career. On this episode, we're talking to Tara Scott. Welcome, Tara. Thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Britta. So I'm Tara Scott. I am a organizational behavior coach. I also do coaching around UX design and product management. So kind of a little bit of everything, but really focus on behavior behind the things that we do and how we can be agile with that just as well as we can be agile with anything else. So.
Fantastic. Well, that sounds like a really interesting career, and I love how you're combining psychology and UX. I think that's just such a natural marriage, and I think a lot of people don't realize that, psychology and how the user experiences things. So let's learn a little bit about your career. What is your A to B story? Where did you start, and how did you get to where you're at?
Sure. Well, I spent a decade in healthcare before I got into tech. I was laid off from a job at a database research group. I was super bored with it anyway. But I ended up getting into technology because DevJam, which was a very small office in South Minneapolis, if anyone's familiar, was 2 blocks away from me. And so I kind of the rest is history. David Hussman was my mentor and taught me all sorts of amazing things. I got to do everything from sales to marketing to eventually coaching. And so I did some coaching shadowing. Then I moved on to a startup and then did some traveling coaching, which was really like kind of trial by fire, just like dropping me into organizations that with things I had never worked with. But what I really discovered through that and through the rest of my career as an engineering manager and all that stuff is we focus so much on what we don't do well over what we really excel in, and don't recognize that like we all have different strengths that play into how we show up at our job. And imposter syndrome is real. And I think a lot of times we allow that to overtake us. Like me too, even though I coach this stuff, there's all sorts of, like, I'm sure yesterday there was a moment of me being like, do I know what I'm talking about? It's like taking a beat to just say like, okay, how do I start to process that? So how I ended up here is that I started building out a psychological safety program for an organization because people were leaving in droves. I'm all about data, and we were looking at retainment numbers and it was really bad. And I said, well, let's talk to the people who work here and like, what sort of problems are they seeing? And the problem was they felt like they weren't able to really show up in a way that was genuine and honest. And so it was about creating a program that was really actionable and evidence-based and experimental. So we could experiment with our behavior and kind of see what helps, what doesn't, and kind of targeting what success looks like any other product or project you'd be delivering. It's just focused on behavior instead of other stuff. So that's kind of how I landed here where I am now.
I think it's so interesting that you're using really actionable psychological safety profiles to be able to affect really hard numbers. I think that's fantastic. And I feel like as we move more into this AI driven, society, I feel like being able to create actionable outcomes, psychological actionable outcomes that drive bottom line revenue or drive, reducing waste in certain ways is probably just going to be such a winning strategy. That's just sort of a side mark, but I'd love to dig into the topic of our show, which is amplify your strengths and, crush your career. And it's kind of a catchy topic, but there's this prevailing wisdom, about, I just want you to tell me a little bit about this prevailing wisdom about how you should, address your weaknesses or like try to make your weaknesses better instead of looking at your strengths. Tell me about that wisdom and how that affects people nowadays in the marketplace.
Sure. Well, I'll say that like as the biggest probably nugget of learning for that kind of sprouted into what I do now is when I started in technology, I knew nothing about agility. I knew nothing about coaching. And David was like, I don't care. I don't care that you don't know anything. I actually think that's a good thing. So why don't you identify, what sorts of things make you curious that you might want to dig into? It doesn't mean you don't continue to evolve and learn. However, you really want to focus on the things that you do well. So for me, that has always been things like public speaking, focusing on communication, helping other people like strengthen their voices. And so that's kind of what I took and ran with. But through my career, I've discovered things that I'm not great at. Like, I'm not great at coding. I took a CS class from Harvard. Why would I do that to myself? Like, it was awful. I started in C, and I was an engineering manager at the time, but I just wanted to like try it. And I wanted to like buck up on my skills. And I had my employees sitting down with me and they're like, this is fun, trying to figure out how to build little Mario blocks in C. And I was just pulling my hair out saying, I don't get this. My brain doesn't work this way.
Yeah.
And so I really discovered like it's important for me to know what folks face who are my employees, like from day to day, and the way that their brains worked. And that's really what I got out of that experience. But I also recognized I don't need to be an expert at this stuff. I just need to know how they're approaching problems. That's going to make it a lot better for me. And I don't need to be, a fantastic developer. What I do need to know is some of the problems that they run into and what that looks like. So it's about taking those nuggets of knowledge and being able to kind of understand the world that they live in and then meshing that with the strengths that I already have. So it's kind of about like chase the things that you're excited about, but don't beat yourself up about the things that you just might not get. And maybe you don't want to get. There's a lot of folks who I've worked with who kind of climb the corporate ladder and they're like, well, I'm going to be a people manager because they feel like that's the only thing they can do, but they do not want to do it. And it's like, well, if that's not your strength and it's not your passion, don't do it.
Yes.
Look for an organization that has principal engineers, or you can move into a position where you still get to do the things you love and maybe grow some skills. Now, if somebody wants to be a people manager and they've never done it before, that's a totally different story, but you can't force yourself to do the things that you don't want to do, because if you're not passionate about it, it's not going to fly, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think there is this idea that, if you're not like doubling down on your weaknesses and trying to like improve them and become the best you can be in all areas, that that you're failing somehow in your career, or that you're lazy.
Right.
And what I really love about specifically what you talked about in your story and how that played out is that you understood your strength. You still took some steps to sort of bolster some of your knowledge in that area, but you were honest with yourself about like, hey, this is not how my brain works. This is not how you didn't beat yourself up. You were just very honest. And then that was able to sort of help you move into a new direction in your career in a way that was meaningful to you. So tell me a little bit more about other ways that maybe not specifically in your career, maybe somebody else you've seen or somebody you've coached, but how has this specifically shown to be true? The idea of, addressing weaknesses, but not, trying to make them a strength.
Sure. And I will say one thing, like there were definite moments of like beating myself up after I couldn't do it. And I thought, I felt bad about it. And my director, who was wonderful and still is a good friend of mine, kind of said, it's just not your jam. It's okay. We get to move on from it. And he was right. But in terms of how you can start to focus on maybe some of those weaknesses you do want to improve, I do a lot of coaching with folks around public speaking or presenting, because that's such a, now that we live in I wouldn't say mostly remote world. It kind of depends on where you are, but there will definitely be opportunities for you to be able to speak if that's a thing you want to do. If you want to strengthen something like that, it's about kind of getting an education in it and utilizing it all the time.
Yeah.
So that's the great thing about places like Toastmasters, or if your organization has an internal program, or you go to a coach like myself who can help you kind of focus on what sort of energy are you showing up with, but also understanding why you're so nervous about it. Was there something that happened? Like a lot of us have traumatic experiences as kids or something where we're on like, we have to give a speech in class and something embarrassing happens and you're in front of all these people, you feel very exposed. It's kind of about like facing yourself in the mirror and not being afraid to look at those flaws and recognizing, how do we start to learn from some of the mistakes that we've made,
Mhm.
and make sure that we're not over analyzing to the point of like you're kind of not even a human anymore. You're just showing up as a robot
Mhm.
presenting those things.
Yeah.
People don't want to listen to that.
Yeah.
People want the you to come through
Mhm.
when you're presenting, right? I was actually working with a person around giving talks to executives, and they said, about after about 20 minutes, I kind of freeze because I'm just like, I've been talking for so long, and then I just start to get in my head, and it becomes all this stuff. So it's about, then I dig in with them like, okay, well, when you say get in your head, what does that mean? And they're
Mm.
like, well, I start really thinking about how the CEO is on this call. I want to move to this place. And like, it's literally like another conversation's happening while you're presenting.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to be fully present.
Mhm.
So it's about unpacking that stuff.
Mm.
So it really is psychological, and about kind of making peace with it and
Mhm.
letting yourself kind of shift back to the energy and the confidence that you have continued to procure,
Yeah.
and not letting fear win.
Yes, I love the idea of not letting fear win, and I think there's this myth that, to be successful, you have to be fearless, and I call straight up BS. I feel like maybe you would say similar, but a lot of
Yeah.
times moving into a new place is not about being fearless, it's about understanding your fear and doing it anyway. What would you say to that? How would you
Yeah.
speak to that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I actually went to this great panel last night at MentorMate, which was all about like not just women in technology, but it was really about how we can get stronger. And there were some interesting conversations about, how do we kind of show up, and how do we get stronger with our voice? Well, it doesn't happen overnight.
Mm,
It can't just be like exactly like you said, Britta. We don't walk in and just say, I'm fearless, cool. Like,
yeah,
now I'm not afraid of anything. I can do anything. It doesn't work like that.
yeah,
We have to really unpack some of the stuff that we bring with us, whether it's bad bosses, bad jobs, all the stuff that has made you feel like crud,
mhm, mhm,
and kind of unpack it, and then recognize like, but what are your strengths? What are the things that you can bring to the table? So a few people made some excellent points last night about how it's really not, if you have a bad experience, it's not about you, it's
mhm.
about them. It's like if somebody
Ooh,
else is being toxic or shutting you down or not listening to you, that's not you.
yeah,
That's somebody else's stuff.
yeah,
So it's about kind of recognizing that and saying, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm actually going to focus on me. And I think that's a very hard thing, especially for women or underrepresented folks in our community to do, because that's not something that we're taught. A woman at the table said something like, well, as growing up, I wasn't taught to speak my mind. I was kind of taught to be polite
mhm,
and do the things I'm supposed to do. So how am I supposed to just be fearless? And the
yeah.
answer is you can't just be fearless. You have to do some work to get there in small pieces.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, and I think it's I was talking with Mike Phillips, the last podcast. You should listen to it, by the way, it's great, but he talked about muscle memory, and I feel like the work of becoming fearless is that sort of muscle memory where you build in, like, "I'm walking up
Yeah.
to this precipice, I'm really freaked out, I'm gonna jump over," and the more you do that, the more you're able to confront your fear, the less it has control over you, and I feel like that example shines through so clearly in what you talked about in public speaking and how you've coached people in that. So let's move on to some more actionable things. How would somebody discover their strengths? What would that mean?
Yeah. So when you want to start digging into what your strengths actually are, I do this thing called team dynamics mapping, but it really kind of starts with a self map
Mhm,
first.
mhm,
So it's literally just taking some things that are going to lead you down a path of recognizing what you care about, what you don't. So it's making a list of what sorts of things inspire you, what sorts of things shut you down, um, what do you feel like are your greatest strengths? And what sorts of things are you not interested in doing? Because I think it's really important to understand what doesn't get you going.
mhm,
Like point blank. I think often we're chasing like what lights you up, and that's great to have, but I've played with this formula for a few years, and it's been really beneficial for myself and for others. Because I think it helps you figure out, not just what you want to grow with, but what don't you? So you can eliminate some things that might be on that list.
Mm-hmm.
So once you have a list of like, okay, here are things that kind of light me up. These are things that shut me down. These are the things that I'm most passionate about. What's one thing that you can start digging into?
Mm-hmm.
And once you recognize that thing, like oftentimes I'll work with clients who will say, I was working with an executive who said, I know that I can come across as kind of brutal, and I don't want to do that anymore. And I'm like, well, that's great. I'm glad you recognize you don't want to do that. But they said, I have been raised my entire career by other leaders who taught that way.
Ooh.
How do I start to kind of undo that? And so then it's recognizing and one of the things on their list was what inspires me. And ironically, it was kind leadership. It was having that kindness. So it was something they really wanted to do, but wasn't being projected at all. And so it was us digging into, okay, well, if you want to start practicing kind leadership, what does that look like to you?
Yeah.
So it's giving people the opportunity to have like real life examples, like what has kind leadership looked like to you? So oftentimes I think reflecting on your career can be a really helpful way to kind of self-diagnose, like, oh, that's where that came from. So even creating, like, sometimes I'll have folks create like a little timeline of their career, and it's like, where did you start, and where are you now? What were some of the bright moments? So it's almost like if anyone who's listening has done like empathy mapping or journey mapping, it kind of can look like that, but it's for your career. So it's how do you, it's what things lit you up. Like, you still remember like favorite teachers and stuff, and you probably remember your favorite bosses. What were some of the low lights? And do you think you can kind of connect some of those things to where you are today? Because I guarantee you that you can.
Yeah.
But it really helps you kind of paint a fuller picture and also let stuff go. We never give ourselves a moment to like process and react to these bad jobs, bad bosses, bad moves. And we have to make peace with it and face it and be like, peace out. I'm good. Doesn't mean that'll never surface again, but it's just about having self-awareness. So really it's about digging into those moments throughout your career that have led to maybe these pieces that you really want to focus on, and then connecting things with the past, making some peace with things that maybe didn't go so well, and also taking those threads that have occurred maybe your whole career where you're like, I want to be a kinder boss. Okay, cool. What are some things that we can start implementing right now? That might look like taking a workshop. That might look like definitely doing some reading. I'll have folks do some reading, and then we'll do some active exercises. And I guess the very long-winded answer to your question is other things that people can do right now is experiment with one thing.
Yeah.
Take one thing this week and say, if this is something that I'm moving towards and I'm focused on a strength, I want to make sure that during my meeting that I'm presenting in, for like 30 minutes, that I'm as present as I can possibly be. If I start to get distracted, maybe if distraction's a thing for you, I'm working with someone where that's a thing, then I can find a way to bring myself back. And whatever that might be, maybe there's a Post-it on your desk, maybe there's something that can trigger you to kind of bring you back. So it's really about focusing on small pieces, experimenting. And again, much like working with a product, you're either refining the way that you're working. If you're like, okay, I think I'm on the right path, or if you're not, then you pivot and try a different approach.
Yeah, I love that there's a couple of points I want to pull out there. First, the theme that's sort of coming out for me as we're talking is that it's okay that you're not good at all the things. And I just think that's so important right now. There's this sort of superhero idea of the solopreneur or the career advancement person, and they have to be good at all the things. And I want to normalize the fact that, like, everybody out there, like, you don't have to be good at all the things, and in fact you shouldn't,
and you're not going to be.
Yeah. And it's really important that like you said, you don't beat yourself up for that. Like, you're not going to be good at all the things, and that's okay. A way that's shown up in my life is, so I have ADHD and dyslexia, and they've actually become, as I've reflected on my career, they've become strengths because it allows me to think really differently from people. But when I first started my career, I was a data entry clerk at a local private university, and oh my gosh, I was terrible at it. So because of dyslexia.
Oh, that would be super challenging.
Yeah, and I think I remember just heaping shame on myself because my error rate was something crazy like 50% or something like that. And I can look back on this now and laugh, but previously I really thought there was something wrong with me. The
Yeah.
fact that there wasn't anything wrong with me, it was just that I was in the wrong space to thrive. It's like if you put a plant in an inhospitable environment, like you put a rose in the desert, that's not going to work. They're not going to
Right.
be able to thrive.
Exactly.
So let's say someone has been recently let go. How can they put this into action? How do they, like, what are some actionable steps that they can take to ensure that they are discovering strengths or at least taking action on them?
I think first and foremost is being kind to yourself.
Mhm.
I know that, there are so many people who have been faced with the dreaded layoffs that have been happening. I actually just hung out with a friend of mine last night who is going through that right now. There were a bunch of layoffs at the startup she was working at. And so now she's like, now what? I think so doing what I kind of talked about, like making a list of things that really inspire you, and then maybe making a list, because those your options for making, like, doing this self dynamic mapping. You can write about anything, you can choose anything. So maybe if you're looking for a new career, it can look like, for folks, what sorts of work really inspires me and pumps me up, and
Yeah.
what aren't I interested in doing, or maybe not interested in doing anymore. If there was a dimension of your job, like, I wish I'd been able to take this approach when I left healthcare, because I just felt such immense pressure. I mean, it's also the reality of, like, living in a capitalist society. I was like, I have to make money. I better go
Mhm.
get a job, like, right now. But I wasn't thinking about, what do I want to do? What do I care about? Instead, it was like, what am I capable of? I want us to get out of just focusing on the capability and focusing
Mhm.
on the strengths. Like,
Mhm.
because your strengths are going to align with things that you are passionate about, even if you're not super strong at it right now. Like, I've been saying this for like the past 2 years to my partner. I'm like, I'd really like to start painting in the winter, like, just to have a creative outlet, because I write, but I don't ever really paint. Um, and she used to do scenic painting, and she's like, well, we can always do that, and I don't expect to be great at it, but I think
Mhm.
that it could be something that could bring out a strength somewhere else. I just need to do
Mhm.
it now, because I feel like every year goes by and I'm like, I still didn't do it. But that's the
Yeah.
thing. So, like, taking the time to do that, that can also lead to things like taking a class. There's a lot of free classes that are happening right now through Coursera, through
Mhm.
various universities. The Harvard class I talked about, that's free. It wasn't
Wow.
free for me because I was
Okay.
a boss and I was trying to, like, up my game and get a certification for it. But a lot of those courses are free. But I would
Yeah.
also say, don't overwhelm yourself with them. I do see that some folks, like, they'll take a bunch of them at once, and then they end up burning out, because it's like, oh, well, I really wanted to try all these things. Start with one. Start with
Yeah.
one thing that maybe you're interested in getting into UX design. Maybe you're interested in getting into product management. Maybe you're interested in getting into coaching. Focus on one small slice, and then let that take you down a rabbit hole and kind of see where it goes. Additionally, I would say, whether you're an introvert or extrovert doesn't really matter. Looking for people who, like Mr. Rogers, look for the helpers, looking on LinkedIn
Oh,
at folks who are in the career that you might want to move towards or might be interested in. Just start to connect with people. And it doesn't mean you have to, like, go out for coffee with every single person that you connect with, but start to look for people who might be able to help you open some doors, because we do have a really solid community in tech, but it's a big one. And I think oftentimes it can just feel kind of, like, isolating. It's like, okay, well, I don't have, I've been jobless for X amount of weeks or months. I need to get a job. And it's about, like, balancing that, like, starting to feel the pressure of that, and
mhm.
making sure you're jumping into something that hopefully you like enough to stay for a while. And I'm not even just saying that for, like, resume stuff. I'm saying that for your own mental well-being. Like, don't try, if you can. And I know that's like a privileged perspective as well, because sometimes it's like, literally, I need to pay the bills. If you can
Yeah.
make peace with doing that for a short period of time, and I get it, I absolutely get it.
Mhm.
I wouldn't be able to do something like that either. Like, most humans wouldn't be able to be jobless until they get the perfect career. But that's the other thing. It's not about finding the perfect career. It's about finding things that really speak to your strengths and your passions. And
Mhm.
while there's always aspects of a job you might not love, there might be pieces of that. It should not be the majority of what you do. And so allowing
Yeah.
yourself to kind of explore that.
Yeah, I love that you're talking about how there might be certain aspects of a job that you don't enjoy or aren't your strengths, but the majority of your job should be something that lights you up. And
Mhm.
I think there's this myth that, oh, if I want to sort of move towards my strengths, that I need to pivot my career entirely. I think for a lot of people I've noticed there is options inside of the niche of their industry that they're already in. It just takes a
Yeah.
little bit more focus to try to find those options. Like for me, somebody who's a relationship based person, I never would have thought I could have thrived in tech, but I do really well in, like you said,
Same.
UX and other things. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So there are spaces inside of the industry that you already are in that could leverage these strengths. What would you say to somebody who is discovering these and trying to leverage these strengths inside of the industry? How would you tell them to look for those opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I would go back to the making connections
Mm.
piece. So connecting with people. I mean, I thought the same thing, Britta. Like when I got into tech, that's why I had said to David, I was like, "There's no way I can ever do this. I don't have a computer science degree. I haven't, I went to school for literature and like writing."
Yeah.
And he was like, "It
Mhm.
doesn't matter. Here are the
Mhm.
strengths that I see." So being able to have a mentor to
Yeah.
validate those things is really powerful.
Mhm.
So how do you go about having a mentor? I mean, it can honestly be just as ad hoc as like reaching out to someone and building a relationship. And,
Mhm.
like you and I both talked about Kurt Schmidt,
Yes,
like
love that
people
guy.
who are, I know, yeah, people who are willing to say, "Hey, I'd love to help you. Like, tell me where you're struggling."
Mhm.
There are all sorts of opportunities, I think, to do that. Um, there are meetups that you can go to, there are communities that you can join, even, and if you are more introverted, like even going on things like Reddit.
Mhm.
I've become like a real Reddit nerd during the pandemic. I
Mhm.
think it's my it's like I used to in like the late 90s I had a computer in my bedroom, which was a big mistake that my parents made, but it was phenomenal for me. I'm like up late at night like checking out all the stuff because I was a total computer nerd. But um I loved like being at message boards and stuff because it's a way you can interact with people without the pressure of it being immediate. There are lots
Yes.
of things that you can search for. So you can even Google, like, how do I get into technology doing XYZ? And you will find all sorts of amazing advice from folks who are like, I wasn't doing anything related to that. And this is where I am now. And here's how I got there. So for me personally, I was in speech in high school. It was like kind of because I was not a sports person. I was all about speech and theater. My dad was a speech coach.
Love it.
And so I got really into that and I really enjoyed it. And so for me, for years, it was about like trying to find out like how do I leverage like this love of technology with love of design, but also liking to talk to people. And it kind of organically came about, and also working for a startup
Yeah.
who really needed to get to know their users better. I was like, oh, I could get into like user research or UX or whatever. So it's really about just kind of chasing the tail of those things. And that's not how I even started out. I started out doing like project management, or was supposed to be a project manager at this startup. They didn't need a project manager. They needed a coach and they needed somebody who did UX research.
Mm.
So I kind of said, okay, well, maybe I'll try that. So I would also say, if you're in an environment and an ecosystem where you notice a need, bring that need up. So if you do have a job and maybe you're not like loving what you're doing, look for opportunities within the organization where you are to say, that's something I want to dig into. How can I start doing that?
Yeah.
And hopefully you will have a leader or an organization that says, yeah, let's talk about how you can do that.
Mm.
And, it's not going to be immediate, but how can you start educating yourself to move into one of those roles that would play to your strengths?
Mm. Yeah, I think this is such an important topic. And as you're talking, there's a couple things that are coming out for me as you've been going over these actionable steps is really that like use the resources around you. So I think if somebody doesn't know where to start, they don't know where to start thinking of how to start thinking about their strengths. Maybe they could have somebody around them help them reflect. So ask a close friend, someone you worked with in the past, what they've seen your strengths to be. And it seems like you got a lot of that great feedback from your mentors and from those around you. And then you took that into action, into, like you said, chasing the tail of
Right.
that next opportunity. Um, so if if somebody is, let's say, they're nervous about trying to figure out how to grow their strengths, we're almost at time, but what would you say to them right now, how they could find an environment where they can take action on building on their strengths? So, they're trying to look for a job or an environment where they can thrive.
Ask questions about the culture. And
Ooh.
what I mean by that is during the interviews. And what I mean by that are not like simple yes nos, because if you say, is your culture great here? Of course, they're going to be like, yeah, it's wonderful.
Mhm.
Ask about how people move through the organization. Um,
Yes.
Ask about what opportunities look like for folks who maybe are working in this current position, but maybe they get curious about something else.
Yeah.
Ask what what mentorship looks like. How active are leaders in this organization with their teams? Asking questions like that. I've coached some folks in the past who are looking for new gigs, and they've asked those questions, and sometimes they get deer in headlights. And I'm like, that's great, because you're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you. I know we always say that, but you want to be in an organization where they're thinking about those things.
Mhm,
Like,
mhm.
they're promoting from the inside. There's nothing more frustrating than having a job and you're watching like new people come in and take all the fun stuff.
Yeah.
You want to be able to take part in the fun stuff too. So ask those questions about, you know, if they're asking you, well, what are your strengths? You can ask them back, and you should ask them back. I
Mhm.
think it's really important to do that so that you feel comfortable coming in, and it kind of plays into the psychological safety thing, which is not just a thing you can be, but it's a practice. Like, that's going to help you practice being unafraid
Yeah.
to ask important questions once you're in the door.
Mm. I think all of this advice has just been really actionable, and I'm so excited for people to start to use these techniques to be able to find places and spaces where they can thrive. So thank you so much for joining me. I've just loved every minute of this conversation. We're going to close out
Thank
with
you. Me too.
well, I guess that just means we have to have you on again sometime, Tara.
Yes, absolutely. Would love to.
Awesome. So we're going to close out with just two rapid fire questions. These are my favorite. I always love hearing
Okay.
people's answers to these. But the first question is, what is the most random job that you have ever had?
Most random. I've had a lot of different jobs. Telemarketing. I did telemarketing for years when that was still a thing, because it was a great side job when you worked in college. But that definitely helped me hone some strengths when it comes to getting stronger with your voice. So probably telemarketing.
That is a rough one, man. All the hangups. You probably develop a lot of psychological resilience dealing with all that.
You do. You do. Yes. And also to try not to take it personally. That's a
Ooh.
tough one too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, what is the worst career advice you have ever gotten?
To just suck it up and keep moving forward.
Ooh,
It doesn't work.
yes. Okay.
If anyone ever tells you to just suck it up, that's not a thing.
Mhm.
That means you're burying something else.
Yeah.
So I've certainly had jobs in the past where I've had some not great leadership, or folks who maybe didn't understand the domain I was in, and I would be talking about some challenges. If anyone ever tells you to suck it up, you can kindly say, no, thank you. Like, you don't have to suck anything up.
Yeah.
You can find ways to deal with things. But that also means that you have to be in, like, if you're venting, are you venting for the sake of venting, or are you venting because you want advice? And so
Yeah.
hopefully that person will ask you, do you just need to vent, or do you need advice? That's something that I'm always working on for myself, not just with other people, because a great statement I once heard is like, advice without permission is abuse. So if you're not looking
Ooh.
for advice,
Oh.
then don't take it. But you never need to suck it up for a
Mhm.
job. Know that your feelings are valid, and that's not like woo woo hippie stuff. Like, feelings are a part of the human condition, and you're going to feel frustrated about things.
Mhm.
Instead of suck it up, if somebody says that to you, you can also always say something like, I would really love to have something that's a little more supportive and also a little more actionable, because suck it up is not an action.
Right.
That means you just push everything down.
Yeah.
What's a solution that I could come up with?
Right.
So
Yes.
that's probably the worst advice I ever got.
I appreciate that. I
'Cause I don't
appreciate
do
your
that.
answer so much too. I think because people think that, suck it up and they just have to keep grinding through. And really, when you start to lean into your strengths, it energizes you. And so that's the difference, is like you don't need to suck it up, because there's this energy driving what you do. And I think that is such a great way for us to close out the show. But let's talk through just a couple of things that you have coming up, that where people
Sure.
can continue to interact with you if they have enjoyed this podcast and enjoyed your advice.
Yes. You can always find me on LinkedIn, Tara Scott. Also, I teach publicly and privately. I teach actionable psychological safety workshops.
Mhm.
I've been doing those. I created them a couple of years ago with a colleague of mine, and I'm so proud of them. They've really exploded. We have one that starts May 1st, and we have 2 spots left. So if you are interested, please go sign up on Eventbrite. It lasts for 6 weeks, and it's about experimenting in real time with the ecosystems that you're in, not just work, but family, friends, all that good stuff, and about kind of refining or pivoting your behavior as you move on with specific practices. The other thing is that myself and a good friend of mine, Susan Grieve, are starting a Twin Cities meetup called Don't Get Me Started. The purpose of it is it's not going to be like other meetups, because we're going to have an open mic. We want people to vent on certain topics. Then we're going to have lightning rounds where folks kind of dig into that a little more deeply, and then wrapping up with what we're stoked about. So we leave with some new ideas about what we want to change. So it's really going to be a community-driven thing. The first date of our meetup is going to be Thursday, June 29th, which is David Hussman's birthday. My mentor, who passed away a few years ago, in honor of him, because he created Practical Agility, which was fantastic, and a local meetup. But this is not just tech specific. This is for any human being who runs into problems, because we are all way more similar than we realize.
I love that. It almost sounds like a poetry slam open mic night, but for career stuff.
Kind of.
So cool.
Yeah, we want it to be super different. Yeah.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I just want to thank everyone else too who has joined us and watched this. If you want to listen to this episode again, it goes live on all relevant podcasting channels tomorrow. Don't forget to subscribe to the channels, like and share with friends who you think might benefit from this information, and join me live next week at 8:30 a.m. on the Newly podcast, where you get practical, no BS insights on how to grow yourself and grow your career. We'll see you next time, folks. Thanks for joining me, Tara. Have a great day.